And these are the things we're going to be talking about today. Really, I'm going to try to outline what kind of the problem is here as pertains to getting into cloud security and learning about cloud security and cloud security for our place of business or as a career choice, so on and so forth. And break that down into how it's be relevant for you given your very own job role and the responsibilities that you have at your place of business. And that's going to be the tricky part, or the key part, or both, really, because cloud is so broad and vast, if you will, vast cloud. And so there's many different facets for each of us to kind of take into consideration as pertains to where we're trying to move with our career, or what we need to learn to be effective in our job role as it stands today, or maybe even moving forward laterally, or whatever the case may be. So what you see on the screen here, try to break down what that problem really is. I'll talk a bit about what the cloud is, how it works, how security applies to this. And then I'm not just going to leave you hanging with, okay, here's a little bit about cloud security, right? It's more of a, okay, where do we go from here? What's the relevancy? Why is this important? How do we take it to the next step? That's really what it's all about. So I'm going to pause right there and ask if there's any questions right off the bat. I don't see any, so we'll jump into this and move forward. So what is the problem? And as the first kind of bullet point says right here, well, it varies. Depending on who we are and what we're going to be doing, this is different for each one of us. Right? It could be something like we're in the position where our company is taking a serious look at cloud after all these years. I was in that same position. The problem that I faced 7, 8-ish years ago, yeah, about that time frame, was working as or within the enterprise security team as an engineer, a senior security engineer, technically was my title, and being responsible for enterprise security across all different business units of a billion-dollar company. And those business units had leeway into what they wanted to use for service providers. So they didn't have to use enterprise IT and security. They could go purchase their own third-party solutions, which we're not going to get into that being a good or bad idea. The point is, those business units show, some of them says, hey, we're going to AWS. We have this PCI environment. We're payment card industry. We're talking credit card transactions. That's what the business focused on. And they said, we're moving to AWS, Amazon Web Services, like quote unquote cloud, right? And that was 7 or 8 years ago. And I, as a senior security engineer and responsible for enterprise security, was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to have to learn a little bit about this if I'm going to be effective within my job role. That's what it was for me. Okay, that was my beginning of the transition or my journey into cloud security. It came from a source of necessity and desire, learning this is, what's going to be the future potentially, and here we are 8 years later. Yeah, that definitely panned out, I could say. So that's what it was for me. That was the impetus in wanting to learn, wanting to get better so I could be effective in my job. And that was my problem. My problem was I can't do my job very effectively without learning about cloud security and how this technology works. And that was, like I said, the impetus. And you see other things here, like maybe your company's already moving there, or you're shifting your responsibilities to the cloud, and you have to have the skills that come along with that. All right. And the other real reality here is that things do move quickly. Cloud. We're talking terminology, we're talking services, we're talking integrations, we're talking best practices, compliance, and many, many other facets. There's a lot to take into it. And I don't want to, have that trip you up and say, oh, geez, I knew this was going to be complicated. And sure enough, it's complicated. Yeah, it is complex and it is complicated. But with some help and some time and some effort, we can break down some of these barriers and learn more about what we need to do to be effective in this shift to the cloud. And of course, some of you are already there. The cloud is not new by any means. It's relatively new, but a lot of you may have already been there for quite some time and just to get a little bit better with where you're at. Now, here's the other problem. Yep, I saw this in my LinkedIn feed yesterday. I found the graphic. I figured it'd be relevant to discuss and kind of highlight or really focus on the other half of the problem here, which is there's a lot to do. There's a significant amount of cybersecurity that goes into any high quality service offering. Any mature security department or program at a business takes into consideration all of the things you have to squint so hard to see on the screen, because there's a lot. And that's kind of meant to be displayed in this way because I want to get the point across that we need to be taking into consideration all of these different components, with the exception of this one. With cloud security, that's the one where we're not responsible for it. We're not going to go to the Azure data center and check to see if they have security guards, right? that's the one thing we're okay with. Everything else here, though, is very real in terms of where we need to be focusing in our efforts. And that's part of the problem, because it's so broad, as I mentioned before, that it's difficult to really hone in on one specific element of this. Or I guess we could probably do that, but when we're responsible for multiple cybersecurity domains and on-prem, in the cloud, multiple teams managing that, think about it from a sales and marketing perspective or engineering or analyst perspective, there's clearly a lot that goes into this. And you see these different quote unquote domains, our governance, our regulations, educating users on what not to do and what to do, getting our threat intelligence feeds, so on and so forth. There's actually a lot that goes into this, as you could imagine. So we'll discuss a little bit more about that as we progress. Now the question comes up, what is the cloud? And there's a few different kind of schools of thought here. When you use, you open up your mobile device, you unlock it, and you go to an app, and you start chatting on an app, or you conduct some business transaction. Let's say you go to your online banking app or Venmo, and you move some money around. That's what a lot of folks would consider, well, that's the cloud. Having the ability to interact with the internet at your fingertips with services that are always available and online. That's the cloud. That's certainly one measure that we could look to answer that question. What is the cloud? Well, it's, internet capabilities that are always online and redundant and backed up. A little bit deeper than that, we're really talking about the fundamental hardware and physical data centers and the coupling of those physical resources, like a building that has air conditioning, to put it mildly, and a bunch of servers in racks that works together. That's really more what the cloud actually is. Okay, that's the underpinnings of what makes things work. And that, as I was going to mention a moment ago, you couple that with the infrastructure. So we're talking, network cables that run underneath the earth and up into space to satellites. And you couple that with the services that these CSPs, cloud service providers, make available for us. And that's the one or so acronym or abbreviation I'm going to throw at you today. That's it. There's so many, but I'm going to try to keep it so there's not so many. All right, there is one thing here, maybe in the chat. Thank you, Carol. Like I said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out with that. Now, you couple those services, as in a CSP, a cloud service provider. What's a CSP, by the way? These guys up here, right? AWS is Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, IBM, Oracle, Alibaba. There's no shortage of cloud service providers. These are the bigger ones here in the United States, but there's a lot. Now, Taylor has a question. What's your favorite CSP and why? Thank you for that question, Taylor. It made me laugh because I like them all, or I don't like any of them. It's kind of, a little bit of that love-hate relationship there. AWS, and that's the straight up answer, because the maturity of their product line. If you go back, and I'm not recommending you do this, and you can if you choose to, if you have a kind of that history desire within you to learn more about this. But AWS, Amazon Web Services, definitely had an advantage at the beginning where they were the first adopter and kind of created the roadmap, if you will. Others have followed, but to this day, in my opinion, and I think many other people would agree with this, they're kind of still leading the way with the functionality and the services that they offer and that what they provide. And that's my favorite CSP, and that's the reason why. It's usable, it works, and it's quality, which is, geez, you ask me what my favorite car is, I'll give you the same reasons why. It's reliable, it works, like, I can depend on it, it's consistent. That's what and not to say the others aren't, it's just, in my opinion, AWS is a little bit farther ahead. There you have it. Thank you for the question. We appreciate that. So the services that you see here at the bottom, this is, computing, storage. What does that mean? It means there's a server, there's a hard drive, there's a central processing unit, right, a CPU, there's some RAM, and you put that stuff together with some hard drives, and you have the basis for dozens and dozens of different services that these providers allow us to use. That's what it is. That's what the cloud essentially is. Now here's a visual. I don't know how beautiful all the data centers are in real life. The ones I've seen don't look quite this cool, but I can imagine this is probably, you get the ventilation in front of the rack. The rack has a bunch of servers in it, and this is what you see on the outside. A building with a bunch of HVAC systems on top, I'd imagine. And that's it. You got a huge building with a bunch of servers in it. And of course, there's a bunch of power that goes in there. There's a bunch of fiber optic cables that go underneath the ground there. There's security guards. There's more to it, but I'm not going to pretend that, it's some magical domain. Like, this is it. What you see here is the cloud. Okay? And of course, there's hundreds of these. Amazon has many dozens, and Microsoft has dozens and dozens of these. The point is, these are interconnected, and that's the underlying fabric, if you will, that makes up the service offering of what is the cloud. Okay, so it takes hardware, it takes software, it takes places like these to facilitate services that are offered to us. It's really what it comes down to. So I don't want to sugarcoat it or make it sound like it's some mystical being. Make it clear, easy to understand, and so you can see it for yourself. Now, as far as how things work within our cloud environment, there's a couple different ways to look at this, and quickly break this down with how the CSP, once again, the cloud service provider, has their services laid out, and how we as the user are going to interact with those services. Because that's really a big piece of this. It's not good enough just to have, data centers and networking and a bunch of money invested into a service offering like a cloud service. You have to have, people using this. And when we go to use this, talking about how does it actually work, we're talking about, well, you have a browser and you're, using Chrome, using Firefox. You open your browser, you go to a website, and you click on buttons. Not too bad. It's very doable. Okay, that's a lot of it, especially just getting into cloud and cloud security and cloud fundamentals. That's, to be fair, a good amount of what you're going to be doing. Opening a browser and clicking on buttons, and that's doable, right? The learning curve for doing something like that is not too great. Now, where we take it and how in depth and complex we choose to get with this, that's clearly not just gonna be clicking buttons in our browser. There's certainly much more to it, but from that basic, get into it, check it out, see how it works, get a feel for it. You can certainly go very far with nothing more than a browser as your main tool. The terminology here of console/portal, the terminology changes between which CSP you're using. So portal, for example, would be Azure's terminology. The cloud console would simply be AWS's terminology, where you log into the website and they call it the console. And from that console, you have the ability to manipulate the services that you're using. You can choose to purchase other services. You can integrate what you have. You can create new users. You can deploy web services. You can deploy databases. You can encrypt, so on and so forth. You can do pretty much everything that you'd want to be able to do from that console. That's where everything takes place at. And what that console does is it leverages the, and oh man, I guess another abbreviation there, application programming interfaces, the means that allow us as a user to interact with the backend services within our cloud environment. So when you click a button in your browser, we're talking to an API, an application programming interface. What does that mean? It means that technology is what provides us the ability to make changes in our cloud environment. So how does it work? To answer that question and take a step back, the cloud works by enabling us to log into a portal or a console with our browser and leverage the services that are available to us. And that goes back to, there's a physical data center, there's servers, there's hard drives. Within all of that, there's a software layer on top of it. And that's what we see when we log into our browser. That's really what it comes down to. So that software, which equate to services that we can leverage, and that's storage services, that's computing services, that's database services, that's machine learning services. That's all integrated with our cloud service provider. And that's the difference. That's the difference between, okay, what's the cloud? Why are we moving to the cloud? Why can't we just do this, in the server room or the storage closet where we have our servers right now? Well, you can, but what AWS and Azure and Google and Alibaba and the other ones do for us is they break those barriers of entry down. So we don't have to create our own machine learning interface from scratch, or our own AI implementation, or our own storage of, redundant array of independent disks, right? We have, terabytes and terabytes of storage. Yeah, we could do that. But what happens if there's a natural disaster? Or how many times are we going to have to duplicate that to have quality backups? Well, the CSP does that for us and then charges us money to utilize what they offer as a service. Okay, it's a service-based industry. That's how it works. So very high value potentially. Now, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, there's a Q&A window and leverage at the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. To ask any questions that you have. I'm here to answer that. And like I said at the beginning, interactivity might make this a little bit more enjoyable. Although I'm sure it's, that's difficult to do. It can't be much more enjoyable than this. me sitting here talking to you about stuff. All joking aside, here's an example of what I was just talking about. You log in to your console, and I'm saying console because this is AWS, and you have a list of services you can search for, and services you can click on, little links, buttons, if you will, that you can leverage. Now, before I move on, I'll answer Mike's question. Mike has a question of, are all cloud service providers run by evil megalomaniacs? Not all of them. No. No, certainly not. Certainly not. I don't really have much more to add on to that answer, Mike, for you. But I do appreciate that. Keep them coming. Definitely keep those questions coming. So the links within here, we have services. So there's compute services. And Azure has similar things. Google has similar things. When I say things, I mean service offerings that we can leverage. Okay, whether this is code or leveraging a service to deploy a website, or storage services to back up all of your data, or virtual machines we can deploy, or logging and monitoring. There's plenty of different things we could do. What we see here in the top right example is, someone clicked on S3 down here, and now we have Amazon S3, another window in our browser or tab, or the same tab. And then from within here, there's an option to create a bucket, give the bucket a name, and a bucket, that terminology is simply, it's like a folder, right? bucket has a folder, and the bucket itself is just a container that houses objects for us. What's an object? An object is an image. An object is a text file. An object is a video. And that's all it is. It's just content that we can copy and share and back up. Now, Michael asks, would you also take us through the Google Cloud Console? No, because I don't have it in my slide right now. So I can't easily do that, unfortunately, without logging in, which I'm not prepared to do. So I can't do that right now. Christopher, what is a common theme of recent cloud breaches? Misconfiguration of settings, etc. That's a big one. Okay, there's a fair amount of IAM, and I'm sorry to throw another acronym at you because there's a lot that always come up, and it's hard to keep track of everything. Identity and access management, IAM, and you can just think of that as a fancy. Well, there's more to it than that, but user accounts. So we have users. You have a company you work for. There's different employees who work at that company, and those employees are users of AWS. They log into AWS with their account, and the admin of AWS or the admins of your AWS or Google environments have done a poor job of restricting access, not following the principle of least privilege, things like that. That gets us into trouble. So misconfigurations, IAM misconfigurations specifically, are the big chunk right there of what you see with recent cloud breaches and even historical cloud breaches. You think back to hearing about S3 buckets being misconfigured. That's to a lesser extent nowadays, although you still see and hear about that from time to time. Misconfigurations, you got it right there. If there was another number one, I would have said it by now, but that's the number one thing that I still read about and see to this day, where things just aren't set up properly. That doesn't mean that cloud services are intrinsically more secure, right? It just means that the human element is still definitely. Now, Natalie asks, mentions, this is my first stint in cybersecurity. Well, welcome, Natalie. I'm glad to have you here. This is awesome. And I'm intrigued by cloud security. What are examples of good security controls for cloud service providers? Oh man, there's a lot. And what a great question. Thanks for that, Natalie. And welcome to the cybersecurity fold. It's great to have that. Examples of good security controls. Well, I shouldn't say everything you do on-prem, because maybe, like you said, you're kind of new at cybersecurity. So I actually have a section coming up talking about that when we delve into security, and I will circle back to that and answer that more specifically when we get to that part of the conversation. So great question. And heads up, if you're wondering, a copy of these slides will be shared as well at the end of this, so you can look back over all of my lovely screenshots. And once again, Michael, sorry about that Google Cloud Console. All right, next question. How else does the cloud work? So we talked about what is the cloud, and that's where I gave the background of, there's a data center, there's some hardware, there's networking, there's a console, there's a portal, there's things like that, right? And then, okay, cool. No, how does it actually work though? How else does it work other than APIs and hardware in our browser and our console, things like that? Well, here's other things you can see. And what I want to convey with this slide specifically is the fact that it doesn't matter what your background is. I don't care if you're, strong in network security or an engineering background, or you're a coder, an application developer, software developer, and now you want to, move into the cloud and start something else off, or you have a compliance background, or you're on the sales marketing team, two different things, but you're on that side of the house, non-technical role, and you're just trying to make sure that when you talk to a vendor or you talk to a potential customer, you got your ducks in a row, right? It doesn't matter where your background is. You want to know how else the cloud works? Well, basically we choose a service, and I know these are abbreviations, not acronyms this time. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and then you pay the money and use it. That's the beautiful parts of cloud, where the CSP has created these solutions for us, and then we, given the role that we have in an organization, get to take advantage of it. If you want to pay the money for it, we can do whatever we want to, and that's technical, non-technical, and the like. So Jay has a question, and Jay says, is any CSP more default secure than other baseline configurations? No, not to the best of my knowledge. My knowledge doesn't extend much past the three big ones, though: AWS, Google, and Azure. I've never had a really great reason to go use a different vendor specifically. I have, but not as in-depth as those three. So with that as a caveat, and like I said at the beginning of this, I don't have, I'm not the smartest person in the world that has all the answers. So I can't clearly speak to other CSPs that I haven't used. But just to be clear on that, generally speaking, no, there's not one that's better or more secure by default with secure baseline configurations and things like that. You get out what you put in, and that's kind of a trite statement to make. What I really want to say with that is, by default, things are pretty locked down. In that, when you screw stuff up, there is clear guidance on how to rectify that mistake you've made. And that goes back to the question that came up before, misconfigurations. Misconfigurations are a big piece to cloud security, as in things work, you deployed your servers, your websites, your databases, and so on, and they all work. Cool, good for you. But guess what? You didn't tune them very well. And now you have blind spots with your visibility, blind spots with your monitoring. You don't have alerting set up. You don't have encryption where it's supposed to be at. You don't have root access locked away. Things like that, misconfigurations. And if you're, once again, to the point here that you see on the screen, everything having a cost, you can pay money to enable extra security services in your cloud environment to help you answer those questions of, hey, you talk about these misconfigurations. I know it's a hot topic. How do I know if it's misconfigured? Well, you got to pay some extra money to automate that. But that's one of the cool integrated pieces of cloud security in general. Now, Mike says, are those IAM issues increased when using hybrid cloud and on-prem infrastructure are used? For example, leaping from on-prem AD to cloud auth and back again. Not necessarily. The way I'd answer that is, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it on-prem and in cloud, and you can modify or switch to purely like Azure Active Directory and go pure cloud-based AD. You can use some hybrid solutions, something like Jump Cloud, or you can keep it all with domain controllers on-prem. The level of effort and the baseline configuration, hardening, and the best practices, I guess the best way to say it, don't really change fundamentally until you start looking at a specific service. Now, Matt says, what percentage of companies are running a hybrid model? Production in the cloud, dev, QA. Is 37.4% of companies are doing that right now, Matt. And 71% of all statistics are made up on the spot. So, take it with a grain of salt. Now, Matt, to give you a better answer, I don't know the exact number on that. I don't know that. I could only guess on that. However, well, that's not true. I can't just guess. I can give you my own experience, and what I'm seeing is, you see, if you include software as a service, things like you're using G Cloud or Microsoft Office, now you're talking probably 80% of companies are using some cloud-based services, if not more. I don't know very many companies that aren't using Office 365, for example, right? So that's software as a service. So technically that's a cloud-based service. While you may not be in the Google Cloud or the Microsoft Azure Cloud, some of your sensitive data is, and that counts. That absolutely counts. So you see a large quantity of organizations shifting to the cloud, whether that's the services that they offer or the services they consume. A couple of typos. I don't think so, Mike. Not me. That would never happen. Now, John says, I have a hypothetical. I'm curious to know, if I have business and hosted on a given CSP, should I perform the scans and test myself of my environment and trust the scan test? In the end, I'm wondering what the best way is to ensure I'm doing my due diligence and what I'm responsible for. Oh, awesome question. It does make perfect sense. And I got a slide dedicated to that, a slide without any typos on it, if you can believe that. Now, Christopher, is there a published set of best practices for securing cloud that's considered a global, a gold standard that you would point to? Yeah, there really is. There are a few. I'm gonna take it offline, but there are. And well, if I take it offline, I might not be able to. So let me pull that up. I'm just going to point you over to there's MITRE, MITRE, and there are some AWS has their own best practices guidance, and we can always look to CIS. So that's the one I'm going to give you. Check out CIS security cloud benchmarks or something like that. Google that, and you'll get what you need. CIS is probably, I would say, the gold standard. Since there's a huge people component to cloud security, I'd imagine in business, third-party vendor issues are concerned. Oh yeah, Natalie, awesome question. That's a huge concern. There's whole departments dedicated to that, and whether that's clients, vendor management, depending on the size of your company, those are two separate entities. We have to look and take a very close look actually at what we're going to be doing to perform our due diligence as pertains to vendor management. Are we trusting that vendor has performed the baseline security best practices for us to be able to consume their services? Are we assuming that AWS is SOC 2 compliant or HIPAA compliant or FedRAMP? The answer, to just give you a straight up clean answer on that is we can clearly go to AWS. And when I say clearly, I mean, we can go to AWS website, we can go to the Azure website and check to see which services they provide that are completely supported or compliant with a given set of requirements. And that's a piece of it, right? We're using software as a service, we're using the Google suite like Gmail and their cloud service solutions that they offer. How we know that those are up to snuff, so to speak, and secure? The answer is it's gray in that we are not going to have visibility into Google data centers and things like that, but we can rely upon the third-party compliance that they have gone through, because they're going to show that, hey, we are SOC 2 compliant, or we are HIPAA compliant, or this S3 storage service that AWS offers is compliant with PCI, for example. And it's clearly written on their page. You can see it's black and white. It's very evident because they know that that's a huge driver for a lot of companies, because those companies want to use them for compliance purposes. Now, last question I see here at the bottom: what is the difference between cloud security and DevSecOps? I'm going to come back to these in due time, because that's a little bit separate, but definitely something of value. So here you have it. That's how cloud, one other way that cloud works. Now, other things we see here, securing the cloud. And this is going to speak to a couple other questions that have already come up, so we can kind of deal with that right about now. Securing the cloud, there's a lot, right? As you saw at the beginning of this presentation where I showed that mind map, I think is what they call it, of all the different security, quote unquote, domains right here, right? I think there's a lot. Vendor management, penetration testing, encryption, network security, application security. There's clearly lots and lots of things. So where does it come to the picture? Each and every place that we've talked about so far. Every cloud service I've mentioned, from S3 to IAM, security is or needs to be integrated at every single one of those levels. Now, that just means, as it typically does from a cybersecurity professional point of view, that there's very good job security, right? That's one way to look at it. There's a lot of work to do. Yes, it's a never-ending job, quite frankly, to lock down the environment, which is why we as security professionals are in such high demand, because there's a lot of work to do, right? So one thing that comes up, which actually, when I say it comes up in general conversations, it comes up in this chat from a couple of questions ago, the responsibility. So who's doing what, okay? And we can kind of answer that question by looking at this. So as you look at this for a moment, I'm going to speak back to that question that came up. from John. He's talking about, should I perform my own scanning of my own environment and just trust the vulnerability scans that a cloud service provider performs? He's wondering what's the best way to ensure that he's doing his due diligence of what he's responsible for without spending too much time and money if the provider's already doing it. Well, the quick, dirty answer to that is you're going to be limited in what you can do anyway, as in what you're technically allowed to do. So as pertains to the question of vulnerability scanning, for example, you can see there's in this responsibility matrix, the example of, are you using a colo, like you're sharing a data center, are you using infrastructure as a service or platform as a service? That's the PaaS, that's SaaS is software as a service. When you're using these cloud service options, who's responsible for what? So keeping with the example that John brought up with vulnerability scanning, guess what? You're not going to necessarily be allowed to scan something that's outside the scope. So what does that mean? It means within a cloud computing environment, not to go too far off on a tangent or too deep here, you're going to be using a virtualized environment. So you log into your AWS console, you say, I want to go to EC2, which is virtual machine. You turn on a virtual machine. Cool. Well, guess what? That virtual machine is using a shared hard drive. It's using a shared CPU. It's using shared memory. So that's being shared all through a hypervisor. And once again, not to get too deep into it, the point is all of the components required to provide that virtual machine to you as an infrastructure as a service customer are being shared with other customers of AWS. So back this up to how is this relevant for vulnerability scanning? You can scan your virtual machine. Let's say you give it a public IP address or you keep it internal and you scan it for vulnerabilities. Cool. Let's say you find an issue at the hypervisor where you're able to gain access to other customers of AWS and their information. That's where you got to stop. Okay. That's where you got to go back to. Let me go back to your question more specifically. You scan what you control, and what you see in this responsibility model points you to, if it's orange, you're responsible for that. If it's blue, you're partially responsible for that. And if it's that greenish color, then you're not necessarily going to be responsible for that. And it's outside the scope of where you need to focus your efforts. Does that make sense, John? And as far as going back to the word you said, I think of trusting that the CSPs performing the due diligence, they are. And at least we can assume they are reasonably well because they're being audited all the time. And as I alluded to before, SOC compliance, PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, things like that, they are compliant. And the services that you're consuming may or may not be compliant. You have to look it up on their little matrix that points that out. All right, so that's the responsibility matrix there. And I'll come back to a couple other questions here. But really I want to convey that this clearly isn't easy. And as far as the job roles that are associated with this, we're talking technical engineers, architects, system administrators. We're also talking management, C-level directors above. We're talking sales, marketing team, every single team. It's our problem, but it's something that we need to be aware of. All this lockdown, our cloud service provider, our services that we're leveraging, lock it down from a security perspective, right? That's awesome. And, it takes a lot of work though. It takes a lot of work. Another thing here, zero trust. And okay, so let me go back to cloud security and DevSecOps. Cloud security is focused on all the stuff I was talking about. You have a cloud service provider like Azure or AWS, and you as a consumer or a customer are using their services. So cloud security intrinsically is related to you have purchased a service from Amazon, and now you need to secure that service. That's cloud security. Okay, and going back to the example from just a moment ago, we're talking you have a virtual machine. That virtual machine has patches you need to install. It's like a Windows machine has patches. A computer needs to be updated. you're responsible for doing that if it's your virtual machine that you've purchased or rented, right? That's cloud security, making sure that that machine is patched, and dozens and dozens of other things. DevSecOps, this is development plus security plus operations, and this is more of a model for ensuring that as we deploy applications within our environment, it goes through a pipeline that integrates security into the process along with operations and developers. So developer writes code, that code then has to live somewhere. That's where operations comes into play to provision a server, and then security is ideally integrated at every single point where they're scanning the source code, they're scanning the live code. That's DevSecOps, which is different than cloud security based on what I just said. Now, Natalie, does zero trust make this more difficult? Yeah, zero trust makes everything more challenging in that arguably, maybe not. The trust factor really comes down to my old X-Files saying, trust no one. So we should be coming at this from ideally a zero trust perspective, regardless of whether we're on-prem or in the cloud. So it doesn't typically add too much more to it. Jason says, major concern for email phishing attacks and ongoing training on what to look out for when it comes to these tactics. If a company's email moves to the cloud, do we have the same concerns if the service is off-premise? Absolutely. So number one, awesome question, Jason. Thank you for that. And for everyone else who's submitted questions too, I really do appreciate that. This talk could have gone either way if I didn't have all the really great questions coming in. So I appreciate that. Absolutely, we're still completely concerned with it. What a phishing email is going to do is one of several things. Number one, when I and my company send out phishing emails as part of a penetration testing engagement or red teaming engagement, a company pays my company money to say, hey, attack us. And if we have problems, tell us what those problems are. So we send a phishing email to the employees at that company. When the employees click the link in the email, I don't care if it's hosted in Office 365 in Microsoft's cloud. I don't care if it's hosted in Google's cloud. It's irrelevant. And the reason why it's irrelevant is because when they click that link and go to my phishing website, it's game over. If I can trick them into providing their credentials, if it's hosted in the cloud or not. So it's still a significant concern. Moving to the cloud does little to address phishing threats. Now, with that being said, of course, there's a flip side of integrating extra security services to ascertain whether or not that's an issue and whether it's a trustworthy email, things like that. Now, Kevin Deck, a note from experience, big service providers and CSPs usually are managing their controls and services, and you can trust that. But I've reviewed SOC 2 reports from major software vendors that are also cloud service providers, and there can be major issues found by SOC auditors. Without review of SOC reports, you take your chances. Very, very interesting and acute. So what Kevin's saying is, yeah, the cloud service providers definitely go through the auditing process to be able to provide their services that are compliant with SOC or PCI or whatever it is, but it's important to read through those as well. All right, so Jesse, have you heard of creating a zero trust framework for cloud services? I have. I'm going to need to take that one offline though. Mike, and post fish lateral movement back to on-premise, so double whammy. Interesting. Absolutely. Yeah, depending where those credentials end up going and leading to, that could be extremely detrimental. And that speaks actually back to the whole concept of not only zero trust, which has been brought up a couple of times here, but also the misconfiguration topic, where if I end up getting credentials to your cloud account and you haven't enforced two-factor authentication, or you haven't enforced complex passwords, or you haven't, IAM, identity access management, verifying and validating that user accounts are properly being audited and secured. When you have a weakness there, now we're talking potentially game over. Gain access to, based on lateral phishing movement, your whole cloud environment now is, at my mercy, or at the mercy of a ransomware attack, which is exceedingly easy to do in a cloud environment with the proper permissions. Okay, different topic, not for now. So we're gonna talk about moving forward. Okay, we've talked a fair amount already about what the cloud is, a little bit about how it works, security in the cloud. So what do you do about this? And well, that goes once again kind of back to the beginning of the conversation. Who are you? What is your objective in life, or at least your career, right? And how do you want to get there? You got to determine that path for yourself and feel, what's appropriate for your next move. And that can directly be impacted by where you work and where you want to get to in your career path. So what I recommend doing is, the next few bullet points here on the slide, check to see what's available at your place of business. That's one of the places I started off with, was a read-only account. So I can at least, check to see what was happening in AWS all those years ago. I may not have been the person responsible for making changes, but at least had some oversight into it. And then that morphed into, now I have a little more control, and now I have a little more visibility, and now I'm sitting at the table with the people making decisions and guiding those decisions, whether that's from a legal perspective, whether that's, vendor management perspective, compliance perspective, or a more technical approach. Okay, but see if there's opportunities. Is one place you can check into this. There's also free, quote unquote, cloud service account access. What does that mean? It means you can get free credits one time with Azure, and you can get a free tier for 1 year with AWS. Google, same thing. You get free credits you can use within a certain amount of time, one time only per credit card. So there's a little bit more to that. You will be charged, even if it's gray area. So you might not want to do that right off the bat. Is kind of your miles may vary with that, but certainly worth looking into. And then of course the ultimate answer here: what are we gonna do about this? Right? Get the training you need to be successful. And here's my shameless plug, but that's what it really is all about. As far as you being successful in life, is getting what you need to be successful and taking that next step. So there's clearly in this 50 minutes I've been talking about cloud security for dummies, there's a lot of stuff to cover. Okay, we've explored a fairly wide array of topics, and you've heard the terminology, we barely scratched the surface. Well, it's true. There's a lot to delve into here, and where you want to take this is up to you. So if you want a literal answer, there's a link right there, sans.org/new-sans-courses. You click that button next to Sec 388. Okay, and that's going to get you what you need. Now, of course, you can lift and shift your own career, and put your skills and knowledge to work for you, build on what you already have, and take it to the next level. Now, when I say this last bullet point, pursue a new area that you find interesting, the only way you're going to lose or fail is if you give up. If you're serious about this, go for it. And just a little more information on this, you go to this link up here, fill out the form, check the box for Sec 388, and when this class is available, which is in the next couple of months, we'll go ahead and reach out and contact you. That's pretty much the best advice I can give you. Here's our roadmap. What you're seeing here is specifically the curriculum. SANS Cloud Security Curriculum. I said there's a lot more to cover. I wasn't making that up. Okay, the Sec 388 course I just mentioned, that's where you want to start. If this webinar has been worth your time, you're liking where we're going, you like your kind of conversation, you want to delve deeper into this, and you're at the beginning of your journey, this is where you start. And then you move down the path as time progresses to get to where you need to get to. And has your back. You can learn up, you can learn down, you can learn left, learn right, and that's just, if you're not familiar with that terminology, we're speaking to the current role you have in your organization and where you want to get to. Got your back, and we can help you get there. I can see any other questions that have come up. Is the course free? Oh, cool question. before I get to that, Christopher, I will be taking Sec 48 on demand soon. Awesome. Are you one of the instructors that I can reach out to for Q&A? I am one of the instructors for 488. Depending on if you've already signed up or not, you can specifically choose to go to the class that I'm teaching, so I'll be an instructor, or else you won't have direct access to me, but you'll have another equal or better instructor. I'm trying to be, humble about it. So you can't go wrong. No matter who you take the class with, it'll be awesome. It'll be hopefully excellent. I can tell you that for free. For free. So is the course free? No, generally speaking, absolutely not. Just being straight up with you, there's a lot of free stuff that SANS does, and actually there is an alpha program, because this is a Sec 388 specifically, which is what I was referring to, is a brand new course, and before it goes to production live, we go through alpha and beta releases. I believe the initial version of 388 will be free to some people if you can get in. There you have it. Nice. Glad to hear your instructor. Thank you so much, Natalie. Yep, I'm not just a sales and marketing person. I walk the walk and I talk the talk to an extent. A couple of typos here and there, but other than that, it's all good. All right. Throw any other questions you have my way. And I think there might be something else that just came up. How can I be part of the alpha? Oh, that's a really good question. Nice one, Natalie. I kind of set myself up for that one. How can I be part of the alpha or beta? Let's see. I don't know. Here's the answer, a better answer. Go to that link right there in the slide, click on 388, and we'll reach out to you. And then from there, we can take it to the next step. That's probably the best answer that I can give. It's coming out very, very soon. Samuel, right on. Samuel, same thing as Natalie. Anyone else who's interested, if this is speaking to you, now's the chance. Take that next step in your career, next step in your life, if you will, and go for it. Now, there were a couple of things I may not have gotten to. Feel free to hit me up. I'm pretty active, fairly active on LinkedIn. I'm not that active on Twitter, but if you want to have some of these, one or two questions definitely require a deeper conversation than we have time for in the last minute or two. So with that being said, please do stay in touch. I say that, a lot of people don't ever do it. Don't be scared, go for it. It's contact, it's networking, it's the next step forward in your career, in your path. And I'd love to be part of it. As far as cloud security goes, like I've hopefully made clear throughout this conversation, I'm here to help you out where we all are. All right. So I want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to be with me today. Do stay in touch and have a great rest of your day. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Carol.
All right. Thank you so much, Serge, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.